What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the framework. Today, I want to dive into something that's very important to me, and that's obviously contest prep. Um, and I want to talk about assessing because this is obviously a question that I've battled with consistently over the years, as as early as I can remember, wanting to compete, all the way up until my most recent contest prep, where we were a few weeks in, and I was trying to assess which division I should be competing in to get the most out of it. And this is going to be relative to both male and female. So if you are a female, go ahead and continue to watch. And same thing goes for the men, obviously. So the first and foremost, you have to assess two different things: what's your starting point and what's your timeline. So for me in particular, and I'm going to speak a lot about my own experiences, but also both men and women that I've worked closely with, not as a coach, but just kind of watch their prep and worked alongside of them to kind of see those changes and see the progression. So that I could speak on it from a credibility standpoint. I'm not going to talk about any type of PED use or anything that I'm not familiar with or I don't do myself. So we're going to kind of move away from that. Again, so assessing, your starting point and your timeline. So, most of us, let's assume we are currently in our off season, which I am. So I'll speak on that. Right now I'm sitting at about 184 pounds. I did just compete. We're about 5 weeks post show, give or take. So obviously I'm not where I was when I started prep back in November, but I'm sitting right around that 184, 185. And I'm not spilling over. I'm not fat. I'm still being able to grow. I still have cardio and stuff in place. And I guess that's kind of a big variable for me as well. I'm still doing cardio. And a lot of people, as they get deeper into a quote unquote off season, that cardio will fall off. I have a great program in place off season wise early on, to where I'm still getting X amount of steps. But I'm getting 10,000 steps a day, just for transparency. I'm getting 10,000 steps a day. I'm also doing 45 minutes of cardio 3 times a week. And it's usually going to be centered on one of my 2 off days, as well as 1 leg day. It's always going to be the treadmill. That's just the easiest. I train a lot at home in my home gym, which I'm hoping to eventually be able to put a video on here to show you guys a kind of a walkthrough of that, as well as training down there, because I think home gyms get a really bad rap. But anyway, I digress. So that starting point, where is your cardio? What are those variables looking like? There's a lot of time I've noticed, and the people I've talked with, it's actually a little more on the female side, is they're kind of a little unhappy with where their physiques might be, and they're just like, hey, I want to jump into the show in 6 to 8 weeks because I want to come down and wait a little bit, or I'm not really happy. I don't see my abs as well. And the same thing goes for men, but just speaking on the female side of things, your starting point is you don't have enough carbs in your diet currently. Your fats are next to nothing. One of your only 3 meals a day is a salad. When you get into a contest prep from a female perspective, a lot of it has to deal with your hormones. Obviously, most women get a visit once a month, which I won't speak on because I'm not a doctor. I don't have any type of personal experience with the female system. But anyway, you have to assess a lot of those things, because you're not going to be gaining any muscle for both male and female during the earliest phases of a contest prep. You're really focused and dialed in on fat loss and maintaining your muscle. So again, back to that starting point, for a female or a male, a lot of times that first 4 weeks of prep is dialing in your diet, your cardio, and your muscle retention or your maintenance. It's a big maintenance phase right in the beginning from a muscle perspective, and being able to maintain, whatever muscle you've put on in the off season. 6 to 8 to 10 week preps are just not realistic, unless you are an absolute genetic freak. With me, I can really lose a good amount of weight. I mean, this past contest prep, I dropped like 8 pounds in like 3 weeks. And that may not seem like a lot, but from an athlete standpoint, any athlete watching both male and female, that's a holy shit moment. I mean, you drop 8 pounds and all of a sudden your abs are out, you have lines in your shoulders and in your chest. I consistently pose throughout the off season. So all that starts coming together. And then in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I'm ahead of schedule. When in reality, that plateau is coming. It happens for all of us. So assessing that starting point, are you doing cardio in the off season? Are you doing anything for abs, whether that be, physically training them, or are you doing, vacuum poses 7 days a week? Are you doing something that's core centric? Because as much as, you may think that, oh, like, my posing's on point, or this, that, and the other, that's going to come into play. That's going to be a variable later on in prep, how you control your midsection during your posing or your routines, so on and so forth. So then we move into what I just touched on, kind of assessing your fat loss, and your ability to retain muscle, or just kind of during a maintenance phase. So as you get into contest prep, are you somebody who can drop weight fast? Now, I am one of those people. I can drop weight very fast in that kind of first 3 to 5 weeks, give or take. But then I do plateau, and I plateau hard. I'm lucky to lose a pound a week. I mean, we're talking, I can only speak to my most recent, but like 0.4 to 0.8 of a pound a week, which is fine. But that's how I can assess how long I need a prep to be. Cardio is 5 to 6 days a week, usually just one session right off the bat. But like I said, we're maintaining steps in the off season as well that are only going to increase as you start prep. So, assessing, your strategy begins in the off season, but as you get early into prep, you need to give yourself a large enough window. I'm talking in that, really no earlier than that 14 weeks up till that 20 to 24 weeks. And I know when you hear that in the 20s, immediately it turns people off. People are scared to prep for that long, whether that be a lifestyle balance or, a physical, hey, I think I can do this in a shorter amount of time. It's usually not the case. You're going to bring a subpar physique to the stage, and you don't want to feel like you've wasted your time. So to kind of go back, we're talking about assessing, what class you should be in will determine how your off season went, how much weight you've gained, obviously body fat percentage primarily, your ability to grow muscle. And then as you hit those early phases of prep, your ability to drop fat and retain that muscle. Sort of that muscle maintenance phase goes hand in hand with your ability to lose body fat. If you're somebody who can lose it fast, and now we're going to touch on, your weak points. And let's say you start a prep with kind of, I'm not really sure if I'm a men's physique guy or a classic physique guy. I'm not sure if I'm a classic physique guy or a bodybuilder. With women, it's usually easier to assess early on in prep what class you're going to be in, especially if, you're a beginner and you've never done a contest prep before, or you've competed a few times and maybe your placing just wasn't right. Now you're looking at your physique like, oh, I really didn't fit into this category or that category. And it's kind of determining, am I, somebody who is just, from a female perspective, am I naturally lean? Am I naturally a lighter individual? Do I not really have, a ton of calories to put in every day? You may be a bikini competitor and trying to decide, more or less wellness to bikini. Those are, whether you like it or not, relatively close in the natural organizations. I don't want to speak primarily one versus the other. These are girls who have, larger glutes, more detailed hamstrings, but maybe lacking that overall muscle, whether that be in the upper body or in the legs. And then bikini is just, again, you're naturally a leaner person, and you're able to kind of make that physique flow and work for you. It gets a little more intricate and detailed, and the variables obviously are larger as you get into the, the women's, figure and women's physique, and even as far as women's bodybuilding, which you rarely see, if at all, in the amateurs, unless you're going into nationals and so on and so forth. But I mean, from the shows that I've competed in, 90% of these women are bikini or wellness. Just like 90% of these men, I'd actually even go as far as say 95, 96% of the men competing in natural organizations are men's physique or classic physique. I think bodybuilding, and I'd say the most popular women's division is going to be figure, and trying to, there are girls out there who, from a natural perspective, want to put on size and want to gain muscle. And just as, like, if you're a men's physique guy, you should always aspire to grow. I mean, you should never want to be like, hey, I compete at 185 pounds. My off-season weight is 210 pounds. I never want to get above that. You should always aspire to continue to grow and push yourself, because that's how your physiques are going to get better. I got into bodybuilding and did my first show back in 2014, and I always aspired to essentially outgrow my divisions. So I started as men's physique because I could not bring up my legs. Ultimately, I wasn't training legs properly for so many years. And now with how social media is, and the ability to share information, you learn, okay, this is what I was doing wrong. This is what, I wasn't doing proper off seasons. I wasn't doing proper training. I was doing too short of contest preps. And that goes for men and women. We've all kind of run into that, oh, training's been fun, maybe I'll jump into a show, but you don't really know early on what the competition is going to look like. So assessing, again, that starting point, what your timeline is, your ability to lose, body fat and maintain muscle, and even grow in the off season. So, when you're a men's physique guy and you're looking at your weak points are obviously going to be, your calves are displayed, your back, your shoulders, arms, essentially waist up, and then your calves. If you're somebody who can drop fat very quickly, and maybe you can consistently drop, 1 to a pound to a pound and a half a week, that's what a lot of these judges are going to look for is, do you have that pretty physique, that wide shoulders, wide back, tiny waist, and calves to match? And if you have the ability to do that, men's physique might be for you. Similar to women's bikini, if you're naturally a leaner competitor, or naturally leaner in the off season, and you can drop weight very fast, and your walking around weight is 110 to 115 to 120 pounds, you should never say, oh, well, I'm 115 pounds now, but I want to compete in wellness. I'm going to do legs 3 times a week and try to grow into the show. You hear a lot of people say that, oh, well, I'm going to, do 5-6 cardio sessions a week, or I'm going to do cardio 6 days a week, 2 sessions a day, but I want to grow into the show. It's an unrealistic expectation. Your off season is where you're putting in the calories. You're doing minimal cardio. Maybe it's just cardiovascular health, or you're trying not to spill over based on whatever your coach or whatever you've programmed for yourself. And then as you get into contest prep, you're in a calorie deficit. You have to be in a calorie deficit. I know that's going to rub people the wrong way, but from personal experience, I know people who have tried to grow, quote unquote, grow into a show. It never goes well. If you cut your calories significantly, first of all, always use a coach, and a coach will always recommend a calorie deficit. You can be ready earlier, which brings us back to that timeline, that we're assessing the beginning and trying to assess, again, the point of this video, which category you should even be competing in. You might be at 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day in prep. And then in the off season, you're at 4 to 4,500. These are just random numbers. Do not think that's where you're supposed to be. This is not assessing you, the viewers, personal starting point. For me, I am able to get in about right now, currently April of 2023, 31 to 3,200 calories a day without feeling, like I'm dying, without having digestive issues or where I'm struggling to put down food every single meal. And that's something to assess as well, your ability to digest. We're not going to dive super deep in all that stuff. I want to focus primarily on the ability to meet your goals in a contest prep by assessing where you are when you start and if you're in the right category, because I have fell victim to being in the wrong category a number of times, based solely on those factors. How big was I in the off season? How much time did I give myself? How much cardio was I doing? Were my calories too high or too low? And then all the way up to, did I peak right? I've had a level of fullness the day of a show where I'm looking at other competitors and I'm like, okay, well, that guy's about 15 pounds lighter than me. His obliques are out, better than mine. His abs are showing better. And maybe I'm holding a little bit of water. Maybe I'm a little too full. Personally, when receiving feedback from judges and stuff after the show, which I still do, look, at the end of the day, if you're trophy chasing or you're just competing for the love of it, which I do, obviously it's always nice to leave the day of the show with some hardware. It's ultimately being better than your last package, basically, than the last time you stepped on stage. But receiving feedback from a judge is always good, especially if those judges are going to be the ones judging you time and time again. They can say that you compete on April 1st, and then you compete on April, I don't know what a Saturday is, 22nd or 25th, which is only 3 weeks apart, but you have the same judging panel. There's a very good chance that you would have needed to make changes in order for that judge to reward you. That sounds obvious, but it's really not, because people will think, well, I competed in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and then I competed in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then I competed in Baltimore, Maryland, all under the same umbrella. And you find out that that same promoter is the one that promoted all those shows. So that promoter, from the OCB perspective, is on that judging panel most times, and they're going to notice that you didn't make those changes. So you have to assess your ability to kind of swallow your pride, take a step back and say, okay, maybe I'm not a men's physique guy. I'm a little too big. Maybe I'm a classic guy. Or maybe I'm not as conditioned as most classic guys, but my ability to retain muscle and, fat loss, I can bring in a more fuller package and maybe even do bodybuilding. From a female perspective, maybe you have phenomenal conditioning and you have great muscle tone in your back. You have decently detailed or sized arms that most females probably can't obtain naturally. And, you're like, hey, I really want to do wellness. I have the glutes for it. I love training legs 2, 3, 4 times a week. I want to keep doing that. And I want to train wellness, but you sort of outgrew that division. You have to be able to assess that early on. Hopefully a coach that you're working with will be able to tell you that. They will be able to assess that even before you do. But, moving into those weak points, from a classic physique perspective, I feel, looking back on all my shows. So let's see, 2014 was men's physique. 2016 was men's bodybuilding, only because I was able to get to a certain weight class based on my size. So it only made sense. When you get into classic, it's primarily based on your height and weight. And I just couldn't get close to the top of that class in classic physique. My most successful time as a competitive bodybuilder has been in natural organizations. primarily the OCB, obviously you're on a level playing field. So I want to, touch on that because it does carry over, whether you're NPC, whether you're OCB, whether you're ANBF, whatever organization you're competing in. You do have to assess the competition. Obviously, you can't determine who's going to be there the day of the show, but you can look back and see who's competed. I know that I compete up and down the state of New Jersey because it's local. But you can kind of look at shows and know who or the physiques that they've rewarded in the past, and not necessarily match those, but say, okay, this is a good assessment of what the competition could look like. And I know that I have to be at my best. You should always want to be at your best. You should always strive to be at your 100%. So again, classic physique. I did a men's physique show in 2020, peak of COVID. And I had to do men's physique. I knew that I could get the weight off of my upper body, but I was I was actually about 4 months post knee surgery. I had reconstructive surgery on my patella. And I just could not get my legs to where I needed them to be. Now, from the top of this conversation, what was my starting point? What was my timeline? How was my off season? Obviously, I knew I had assessed my fat loss and my ability to retain muscle at that time. I looked at my weak points, obviously being my legs, and I said, okay, although I want to be classic physique, this is the division that I have to compete in if I want to compete now. And that plays a huge role too. If your mindset is, okay, there's this show later in the year, let's say in this case it was August and I had started prep early February. Hey, this is when this show is. Now is the time to jump in. As I said earlier, I assessed that timeline all the way down to assessing my weak points. My weak points at that point were my legs. Do I have enough time to kind of get my legs to where they need to be conditioning? I wasn't going to grow my legs. Let's touch on that again. I wasn't trying to grow into a show. Could I get my legs conditioned enough to compete in August? Or can you get your legs? Again, talking about, the women's, wellness versus figure versus physique versus bikini. Assessing your weak points and having to do that. Now, I did the show. I believe I placed relatively well. The judge's feedback was your upper body was just too big for this division. We're going to get into kind of judging criteria and what you should expect when you compete in certain organizations in a later episode. I do have some guests lined up for those topics. But just for today, I knew that, okay, it was time to make the jump to classic physique. I assessed my timeline. I assessed my weak points, my fat loss and muscle retention ability, the whole nine, like we've been discussing in this video. And I was able to pick a show the following year, which was about 9 months from, it was March of 2021. So I kind of assessed that timeline. And I built my off-season training, my calories, my rest days, specific carbs, carbohydrates, and fats around my training. And then I assessed my legs. Do I think I built my legs up? Absolutely. To this point, I would argue from a stage presence and from looking back at those photos, 2021 could have been my best package. Again, all you really have to look at in hindsight is those stage photos. I believe I brought a great package recently. But again, you always have to assess your physique and what you wanted out of each show and were you better than the last. So again, assessing those weak points, assessing if it's feasible to meet your own expectations to land into the category of your choice. Look, to be blunt, if you don't have the glutes for wellness, you probably shouldn't do wellness. If you can't get your body fat percentage down, or from a female perspective, if you're 150 pounds in the off season and you know that a bikini competitor is going to be around that 110 to 115, I'm not assuming what your weight should be when you get on stage. I'm just trying to assess I'm just trying to give a realistic expectation. Bikini girls are tinier. Men's physique guys have tiny waists. Have the weirdest body parts that stand out. For me, I have, the forearms, the calves. I have a big midsection, not because of how I eat. It's just genetics. When I start to lose weight, my obliques stand out. I don't have the tiniest waist for men's physique. Maybe that's not going to be the division for me. I could grow my lats. I could grow my delts. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but assessing those weak points and your ability to meet expectations, your expectations. I have my windows open. My allergies are killing me. So now we get into, your training focus. Okay, we rewind again. We start back into the beginning of your off season. We've already assessed you should be hitting an amount of steps per day. You should still be considering cardio based on your needs. I have the ability to spill over, even though I have the ability to lose fat loss very quickly. Again, my midsection, like I said, my obliques just happen to stand out. So I know that I need, to train my core, and I need to keep cardio in. Maybe that's the same thing for you. Your training focus, I personally follow a 4 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, 1 day off. And this has just been implemented this past off season. I rode for the longest time, for probably about 2 years straight, was 3 on, 1 off, 3 on, 1 off. I have, weak arms. I had to assess that. In classic physique, your front double, your back double are two of your most predominant poses. They're going to get a lot of focus. So, I need to grow my arms. So with my A split, it is pull A, push A, legs A, arms off. And then pull, push, legs B off. So, focus your training around those weak points. I do have to bring up my upper back, my traps, and kind of, along, my upper back, and widen my lats. So I do really hit those back days really hard. And I need the off day right before it. Not only does it allow me to get my cheat meals in, or my replacement meals, my refeeds, whatever you or your coach call it, but assessing my weak points to the ability of where I want to be come show day. So the off season is going to be focused on higher calories, maintaining a step count, maintaining cardio to a certain extent. That will taper down, but it will never go away, because again, what are your weak points? What are your timeline expectations? What is your starting point? Assessing your fat loss and muscle maintenance. I'm beating a dead horse for a reason, because these are factors you need to assess before contest prep. Your training focus should be around your weak muscle groups. If you are a bikini girl who is looking to outgrow the bikini division and you want to get into wellness, it's very popular right now. It's about as popular as classic physique is in any organization. So you need to make the adjustments. Maybe you want to start doing legs 2-3 times a week. Assess that with your coach, or if you're training yourself personally, and train around those weak points, because it will benefit you. There's 100 different variables, not to overwhelm anybody, but there are a ton of variables you have to factor in when it comes to choosing the right category for yourself. And if you choose the right category, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to be better. Again, it all boils down to, what is your end goal? If my end goal right now in April of 2023 is to compete as a bodybuilder in January of 2024, I will assess these things again, top to bottom. And I'm going to hit the reset button, because I want you to really think about these factors, write them down, put them in your notes in your phone. What is your starting point? How long is your timeline? Assessing your fat loss and muscle retention or muscle maintenance abilities. What are your weak points? Did you bring them up? What does your training look like? And then again, what is your end goal? If my end goal is January, it is not. I'm just using that as an example. And I have a weak upper back. For the next 7 or 8 months, back is going to be a focus. My calories will be built around my back days. My off days will be focused either the day before or the day after back from a recovery standpoint. Now, that's not to say it should ever take away from other muscle groups. You can always be better overall. But those are things you have to take into consideration. You know, let's say you have $20 to spend in a week. And you have, you know, you give 5 training days, you give $4 to each day. An IFBB Pro just used this comparison in a podcast that I listened to, so I'm going to steal this from John Jewett. And you need bigger arms. And you give $4 to back, $4 to a pull day, $4 to a push day, $4 to a leg day, $4 to another push day, $4 to another back day, pull day. However that breaks down. Basically 5 training days, $4 a day. But you need bigger arms. Maybe you take $1 from each leg day and you add that to your push and your pull days, so that you could really add that extra stimulation and the extra sets and the extra reps to those arms, which is actually something that I do now. I do take a little bit away from both of my leg days because I have 2 leg days. I have the ability to take away from my legs, because I've, again, assessed my timelines and assessed my weak points. I take, $1 from one leg day, $1 from another, and I implement that expenditure into my arms on other training days. Maybe it's $1 from pull, maybe it's $1 from if you want to get super detailed, maybe I pull a set from lat pull downs and I pull a set from incline benching or incline presses, and I pull a set from lying hammy curls. So now I have 3 additional sets at expenditure, and I'm going to implement those into other arm days. So instead of doing 2 sets of push downs and 2 sets of an overhead movement, now I can do, and I can work it around that. I can implement additional sets and reps. So thank you guys for watching. I know this was sort of rant based, but I really hope that this helps you kind of assess your starting point as well as your off season. I mean, you have a starting point for contest prep. You have a starting point for off season. Assess your timelines, assess your strategy, how you're going to attack it. Do you have a coach? Do you not have a coach? What are your weak points? Did you bring up those weak points? Or are you ultimately just competing because you love to compete and, you don't really care what the end result is? You just want to get on stage. Great. But at the end of the day, you have to have a strategy. You should always be looking to put yourself in the best situation to be better. And that is going to boil down to selecting the right category. I hope this helped. I'm going to drop, these pointers in the description below. Thank you guys for watching. I, again, hope this was helpful. Drop a comment below, drop a like. Thank you guys for subscribing and following along. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for stopping by the framework.